Today, I'd like to introduce you to Huntress, where our mission is to provide real cybersecurity threat hunting for the 99% of companies who currently really aren't doing it. A few quick facts to get us started. Huntress is a security platform that provides persistence threat hunting as a service. We provide the security expertise and deliver reports digestible for IT teams without all of the unnecessary alerts. We serve over 25,000 customers, over 1,800 partners, and have over 500,000 agents deployed out there. A few things I would love for you to ultimately walk away with from this meeting. Huntress hunts for persistent threats that your preventative security software consistently misses. We are complementary to your existing security stack, and we are purposely affordable in accordance with our mission to provide security for the 99% of companies who really can't afford to do proper threat hunting. So, first thing, we are so emphatic about wanting you guys to make sure you don't have attackers dwelling in your environments right now that we can provide you a free persistence assessment. So ask Next Gen. They can get you started on a 21-day free trial. We can let the hunt begin immediately. All right. So why should you care about hunting for persistence when really like 1% of companies can afford to do it? You should care because persistence is the most important and most ubiquitous part of the attack chain that nobody really understands. Security researcher John Hammond estimates that over 90% of all successful domain-wide ransomware attacks include persistence as a part of the first steps in the attack chain. To try and prevent domain-wide attacks to the fullest, we should be creating policies from something like a NIST cybersecurity framework and then mapping behaviors and products to the necessary controls when we see gaps in our environment. Look at all of the things that we should all be doing, right? Nobody actually does that. In reality, most of us use our time and budget to have a security stack that looks like this, where most of the budget is spent on preventative measures like AV, firewall, etc., and then recovery measures like backup and disaster recovery solutions. Why don't more companies focus on detection and response? You have to be subject matter experts. You have to know what you're doing. You have to have security eyes on glass constantly. Only 1% of companies truly threat hunt because it's so incredibly expensive to do properly. And that's mainly because it relies on incredibly expensive humans who have the ability to hunt for, find, expel the advanced persistent threats that preventative software doesn't really have a prayer at stopping. Expelling previously unknown threats gives organizations a second chance at stopping business altering breaches before the attackers actually get to the point where they're causing damage. And I'm sure this is where you might start thinking, I pay a lot of money for my next gen AV, my EDR. They tell me they do these things. I agree with you. They say a lot of things. They say that they're make you safe from all new and existing threats. And if claims like this were true, you'd be even protected from Microsoft 0 days, right? Maybe not so much. Case in point from early, just 1 month ago, about when malicious web shells were getting dropped on unpatched on-prem Exchange servers left and right. AV and EDR were installed. They weren't making a peep. Stuff like this happens all the time. What all offensive security experts know, and all the attackers know, is that security prevention software tools miss well-known threats about 50% of the time. And despite what AV companies might lead you to believe, this isn't a new problem. For generations now, the AV industry has focused on all their efforts on building better mousetraps and spent billions of dollars on advertising to make you believe the newest trap is worth what they're charging. You put out traps, you're going to catch some mice. That's great. And yes, that is a Wi-Fi enabled next gen mousetrap. Who knew? But once in the house, the smart mice will still find a way to get the cheese, trap or no. What you really need is an exterminator to hunt down and destroy the nest and remove their access into your home. Remove the footholds. Huntress is a persistence exterminator. When your AV blocks something, that's great. It's doing its job. We're there to find and expel the threats that it's never even aware of because it's not going to detect. What you see here is a snippet from the MITRE ATT&CK Enterprise Matrix. It highlights many attacker tactics, techniques, and procedures. The threat hunting that our founders did while serving our country at the NSA, it didn't have any limitations. Their hunts could go wherever their hypotheses took them. But they also had all of the resources of the US government at their disposal. In order to productize threat hunting and make it affordable, we had to narrow our focus from their expertise. They know that as an attacker, if your persistent access to an environment is removed, meaning your access won't survive a simple reboot or a password change, the jig is up. Your cover is blown. It's time to move on. After the break in, establishing a persistent foothold is the attacker's top priority, but it's also an attacker bottleneck. If you were to search for a definition of persistence, you'll get a very clear description from MITRE. Forgive me for reading, but it's pretty important here. Adversaries use persistence to keep access to systems across restarts, change credentials, and other interruptions that could cut off their access. Techniques used for persistence include any access, action, or configuration changes that let them maintain their foothold on systems, such as, and this is basically the only way to do it, replacing or hijacking legitimate code or adding startup code. But how many of these things can there be? These should be easy to spot, right? Hundreds of auto starting components of Windows, commonly referred to as auto runs, are running on your PCs right now and are virtually never investigated. From an attacker's point of view, that's great. I can play in here for months and you never know. But it also works out from a hunting perspective. If you are one of the few humans on the planet who knows what to look for, you can hunt for imposter auto runs without having and understanding the organizational context. I don't have to know that Bob is logging in from South Florida and understand whether his login is appropriate or not. And there are always plenty of these items to hunt through. It's not uncommon to see between 800 and 2,000 auto running components of Windows per operating system. But where do these things come from? How many times you sat through a software installation? Under that pretty little progress bar, the installation is creating new files, folders, scheduled tasks, run keys, services. It's all part of normal Windows operation. Every month, for example, when Windows updates your machine, it usually creates dozens of new auto running items. But not all auto runs are good. Unfortunately, if you click the wrong link online or in an email, enable the wrong macro, or click to run the wrong installer, that can add startup code to your PC as well. And those auto runs aren't as easy to find or get rid of. Again, you might be thinking, I have an expensive EDR for this. I'm covered. Preventive tools are focused on blocking things that show up on top of Windows, things that are written to disk. So adversaries and advanced threats have evolved to live in the Windows operating system, in the registry, and in memory, in places where your preventative tools either can't or won't block without risk of corrupting and shutting down the operating system itself. How many times has in your career have you had an AV or some other tool create a blue screen? What'd you do? When you chased it down, you uninstalled the tool. It doesn't want to risk that. So even if it could find and block these things, it won't. It simply whitelists them so you don't have a threat of the tool being wrong once and then you uninstalling it. And it's not easy. It's not necessarily because they're not doing their job. We are just doing very different things. If you don't have a full background in security, it's completely understandable to have a hard time figuring out the difference between AV, next-gen AV, EDR, SIM, outsource SOC, or just having a partner do it all for you. AV is so ubiquitous because it's so affordable. Next-gen AV is more expensive, but it can still be operated without a full security team after some fine-tuning based on the local context, what applications should and shouldn't be there, et cetera. EDR and SIM aren't as valuable tools unless you have experienced security teams to run them. So a lot of customers choose to partner to have the partners do that all for them. But there can be mixed results because the partners have no insight into local context of the organization. They can whittle down the alerts, but they're still feeding them back to you to say, can you check on this and see what looks good or not? And depending on what you thought you signed up for, you may be more or less happy about that. Other than Huntress, there's nothing else that offers persistence threat hunting as a service that isn't both stinking expensive and still requires you have your own security experts to provide that local context. What we do, Huntress is a combination of software, automation, and incredibly rare people. Once installed, the agent gathers information about every single auto starting component on the Windows systems, endpoints, and servers, and uploads it to the Huntress cloud every 15 minutes, allowing us to monitor incremental changes. We use automation to detect these only known to Huntress footholds from previous hunts where we wrote our own detections. And then we use tools and algorithms to prioritize that data into a queue. And that's where the incredibly rare individuals on our threat ops team diligently hunt through that data to find malicious persistent footholds. When they do, they send a detailed incident response to your a report to your email or ticketing system with the relevant remediation steps. And I want to take a moment to answer some frequently asked questions about the Huntress agent to help explain why this should be one of the easiest trials you'd ever run. The Windows agent, it's a Windows only agent. It's small and it's limited in scope by design. It's under 12 meg, consumes less than 2% of CPU, doesn't have any tray icons or system pop-ups. All it does is gather data about mechanisms that automatically run when either a program starts, a user or an admin logs in, or the computer boots up. And then it sends that stuff back to Huntress for analysis. It's just a data gathering tool. It doesn't interfere with anything, and I mean anything. That includes your existing AV. Your users won't even know it's there. Turns out having a background in writing exploits and persistence mechanisms at the NSA, it's a great background for writing a lightweight Windows agent that's unnoticeable to your users. Using Huntress is like outsourcing the detection and response categories to a group of offensive hackers that give you a second chance at stopping incidents on your endpoints that make it past your protections before they become a more widespread breach. Our founders, Kyle, Chris, and John, met during their time in the intelligence community. It was their job during their decade tenure at the NSA to carry out extremely sophisticated cyber warfare on the targets they were assigned. They helped create some of the exploits and persistence techniques that they are now helping Huntress customers expel from their systems today. Our founders' offensive expertise is behind our threat ops team and is what empowers their ability to hunt at scale. Here's what the deliverable is going to look like. Huntress provides an incident report that shows exactly what the issue is, exactly where it is, the other security products that were installed on the device at the time, exactly step by step how to get rid of it. And then this information about persistent footholds, this is what we incorporate back into our product to help us find these threats more quickly in the future. And then we've taken it a step further. We add an easy button. So if you don't want to do it yourself, you simply review the remediation plan, click approve, and the Huntress agent will be tasked to automatically perform these actions on your behalf. And you'll be able to see this in deeper dive with Shane here in a little bit. So I'm going to keep moving. We find these things that bypass every AV out there. And this one had CrowdStrike. This one had Sentinel-1. This one had Sophos, just to name a few. We could do this all day. I can show you redacted reports that we're cleaning up what every preventative tool is missing. But that's not all we do. While attackers are out there evolving their tactics, we're evolving our platform to hunt them. No matter the stage of the attack, Huntress is finding ways to help behind the scenes to expel advanced attacks in minutes instead of months after the fact. In addition to Huntress for persistent footholds, which is the core of what we do, it's our unique differentiator. We also scan the endpoints for open and misconfigured ports like RDP to reduce the overall attack surface. We give you the option to have the agent deploy ransomware canaries for early detection. And most recently, we shipped our public beta of Managed Microsoft Defender. This service makes Microsoft Defender usable at scale. Microsoft Defender is really one of the best next-gen AVs on the market, but you can't manage it centrally. You can't get reports. You can't schedule scans en masse. We fixed all that and allow you to manage Microsoft Defender from within the Huntress console if you so choose. Completely optional. All of this is under one SKU for one cost. The pricing is simple, fair, and affordable. MSRP is between $5 down to $2, depending on volume. That's per agent per month. And an agent here refers to a Huntress software agent running on a Windows endpoint or server. And you could pay monthly or annually as you prefer. We're not selling snake oil here. A lot of stuff that involves humans behind the scenes says, yeah, we'll give you a demo, but we can't afford to let you try. We get you to try before you buy. We have a free trial for unlimited systems for 21 days or your first 3 higher critical reports, whichever comes first. And again, the agent is just a data gathering tool, so it won't interfere with anything from Windows or any third-party software, any existing security software. It's 11 megs, takes about 2 seconds to install. You can push it out through GPO if you prefer, or if you don't have an RMM. doesn't have any tray icon, system pop-ups. When it's running, nobody's even going to know it's there. So next gen can start you guys a trial whenever you need, and we're happy to help. And I see something in the chat.
That was just me, Jeremy.
Okay.
Yep, we're
So
good. Thank you.
I'll pause there and see if we have any questions from that piece, and then hand the reins to Shane.
Silence.
Just a quick question
Yeah.
on
Sure, Scott.
OS versions, Linux supported and other platforms.
So currently we're Windows only, and every supported version of Windows is what we support as well. That we have a Mac agent that is in development. Question still remains whether Linux would be the next use case for us. The low-hanging fruit, like 95% of the focus of the attacker side, is on Windows, because Windows is backwards compatible since the beginning of time, and it's so ubiquitous. And so while it kills us, like in our hearts, that we don't have an agent for Mac already, and I could be honest, I'm on a Mac right now, and then Linux as well, we have to go where the market is. And so that if the market would bear those, we'll do it. But for right now, we're Windows only.
Got it. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of version of Windows, workstation servers, it works without any problem. What's the minimal OS version on Windows side that we need to have for it to be compatible?
I will drop in the chat a link to all the supported operating systems. But basically, if it's not an end of life, end of support version, then we support it as well. It's not, that doesn't mean you can't get the agent running on an older version. It's just if you're running on an end of life, end of support version of Windows, we've probably got more problems than just getting the agent installed. See Microsoft Exchange for the last month, but I will drop that in here in just a moment.
I have one more question, if you don't mind me asking.
Sure, please.
How nice does it play with the endpoint protection itself on the computers? Do we need to create a lot of exceptions for it to work properly, or how does that interaction work?
Yeah, so that's a key differentiator here. We are not trying to do the same thing as your other endpoint protections, which are trying to block things as they show up on disk, which means they are trying to scan every file that ever comes on there a second it comes on and make a split-second decision of whether it's good or bad and block things. That's their job. That's cool. That's great. We are simply a data gathering tool. Every 15 minutes, it wakes up, takes a hash and a binary of these underlying components of Windows, and then it reports that information back to us, doing completely separate things. So I can say very confidently, it doesn't interfere with your endpoint protection. It's not something that is going to block applications. It doesn't require the fine tuning that you're used to with security software agents, because really all the agent does is just gets the information and sends it back to Huntress, so we can do all of the security service, which is hunting through the complete universe of auto starting components to find the needles and haystacks of the ones that shouldn't be there. So it really, like, I know you've heard this before. I understand the reason for the question. The Huntress agent will not break your OS, your image. It will not interfere with your endpoint protection, current endpoint protection. You will be okay, and the end users won't ask you about it because they don't even know it's there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So what about updating to the agent? How often do you guys push updates? How do we push those updates to our number of endpoints?
Huntress has two services that run, Huntress agent.exe and Huntress updater.exe. And so we push updates all the time, but it's not something you have to do anything for. That part of it is basically a cloud delivered service. So as long as those two processes are running, which run as a part of just running the agent, it always updates on its own behind the scenes, and you don't have, it's nothing for you to patch.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I can go next.
Yeah, Vic.
What type of integrations does Huntress have? I know you're very, I think your CEO is very active in the community. There's always blog posts coming out. I think you were one of the first ones that even mentioned the exchange vulnerability. Our shop is very, every one of our security, every piece in our security stack integrates with each other. So the whole is kind of more than the sum of its parts type deal. So our SACE talks to our email endpoints, talks to our endpoint protection, our firewalls are integrated into it. So everything kind of talks to each other. Like we even have custom IOCs from these services. So kind of everything's updating each other and making sure they have the latest and greatest in threat protection. Um, do you have any integrations like that? I know you're mostly against persistent threats, but what kind of data sharing do you have in integrations?
We don't, and I'll explain why. So we don't have an API, so it's not gonna yet. It's not something you can easily just pull logs or pull the auto runs into your SIM or your EDR if you're writing custom detections there. But the main thing to keep in mind here is that all the things that you just mentioned, which by the way, you're doing a great job. That's the right thing to do. That's all basically in the preventative stack. And those things should all be talking to each other because, like, for example, one of the ways that we prioritize which auto runs we're going to hunt through first to like kick off investigations is we'll take that hash and binary that we created of the auto starting component of Windows and we'll throw it over via API to VirusTotal and see what their score is. The vast majority, probably in the 90 percentile of things that we report on to our customers sending incident reports that Shane will take you through a little bit more of, have a VirusTotal score of 0 out of 69, 0 out of 71, whatever that, however many they have today. Because most of the stuff that we find are attackers misusing valid Windows components. So PowerShell isn't going to have a VirusTotal score by itself, right? Or command prompt or mshta.exe, like all these valid underlying components of Windows, they're just that. When you string them together and then you misuse them and use them a VB script to call out to a valid domain, call out to your Google Drive to download a file that shouldn't be there, like that's the level of stuff that we're finding, which is past prevention. So we are hunting for things that have already made it past all the layers that you just said. And there aren't going to be the same level of indicators of compromise that we're using because we're just getting the universe of data of all the auto starting components that are on your device. And then we have human beings hunting through those to actually find which shouldn't be there. It's not something you can fully automate. You can't take the humans out of the equation. So even if once we get an API, which is slated for later this year, and you took the basically the JSON of auto run data and fed it into your SIM, what's it going to do with it? It'll give you the ability to go hunt through all the auto runs that we find, but you don't want to do that because, like, do you know what you're looking for there? That's the entire reason for having the Huntress service. Now, at that point, what you could do, of course, is just like you do for Duo or any other SaaS utility, you can take the admin logs and pump them into your SIM and set detections for like when new users are added to the Huntress console, send me an alert, stuff like that. But the data that we create, which we show in the Huntress console for all, and Shane will show that, is not something that any of your other tools, it would be helpful to them because it's just the hash of the auto starting component of Windows. So unless they're going to go dig through those to find the ones that shouldn't be there, it's not going to be helpful. That's why it's really threat hunting. Does that pass muster for you? I mean,
Yeah, the way I'm seeing it, so we're on the CrowdStrike shop. We have the whole next gen behavior analytics piece to it, and then this will just kind of be the catch-all for anything that's relatively inactive or that wouldn't be caught by the firmware detection or et cetera.
exactly. And so just throw out TrickBot as one that you've probably all heard of. This is a malware group that's what they do is they create polymorphic malware that by design gets around your CrowdStrikes of the world, gets around whatever, and then hides and dwells in the system. Those are the type of things that we find, but they only show up after all of your preventions have failed. So if we're sending you a report, that's why it's called an incident report. It's not an alert. This is an active incident because all of your other protections have missed this. And now this is what we're finding. And you can clean up that incident before it becomes a breach.
Perfect. And then, sorry to take everyone's time, but one more quick question. We're kind of a low noise environment. When an alert does trigger, we need it to be important. I'm wondering what are since it's like a human based, everything's kind of human based, what is the level of alerting available? Is there a lot of false positives, or is it, or
We
how do you
send
minimize it?
0 reports that aren't touched by humans. I'm not sure if I said that right. No reports we send are automated. Every one of our reports is sent by a human being. And because of that, we have, from our perspective, we have no false positives, because if we're sending a report, it shouldn't be there. Now, if you're running a coin miner on your PC and you want that there, then yeah, you can say like, hey, don't report on this anymore. I'm mining Bitcoin and this is my PC. And we'll be like, all right, cool. But it shouldn't be there from a work perspective. And that's still like that's not a false positive. It's still something that shouldn't be there. It's just something you're okay with. So that's our version of a false positive. But we have high, critical, and low. Critical is like, do this right now. Stop what you're doing to do this. High is get this done today. Low is probably a potentially unwanted program. It's somebody installed a toolbar that's like stealing clicks or serving ads. It's not something you need to be worried about, but or not something you need to be worried about right now, but probably doesn't need to be in your environment. You shouldn't see incident reports from us every day. Once stable, you probably shouldn't see incident reports from us every week, but the one a month or one even every 6 months high or critical report that we send is the thing that would have led to a ransomware outbreak because it already made it past all your other protections. So we are very low noise, and we don't send alerts. We send incident reports showing you exactly what to do about the thing that we already found and determined was malicious.
I'll go into some of that more, Vic, when I'll show you a report and kind of walk through how our engineers do their thing. So hopefully I'll help inform you a little bit more.
And do we want to pop over to that now, guys?
Let's do it.
Cool.
All right, cool. Let me share my screen.
And guys, this is great. Just keep the dialogue going. Questions as Shane goes through and anything else that pops up. Just
if you have any questions, just interrupt me. So can everyone see this okay? Good. Great. So we'll start by talking through the dashboard, and we'll go through an investigation, and we'll kind of explain what it is, how we do what we do, right? I think Jeremy did a good job with the overview. And the purpose of this is to really dig in a little deeper so that you guys can ask some more questions if you have them on exactly how we operate. So this is our dashboard. When you log in, this is where you're going to end up, okay? On the left side here is where the most important stuff is. If there's any active incidents, that's where they're going to be. The resolved incidents are just historical, right? They're things that we've already taken care of. And then here we have investigations, which are basically the ongoing things that our Huntress people are actually, the threat operators are actually looking at and going through and pulling thread and trying to figure out, what's going on, right? And so, and like Jeremy said, our service is a combination of software and people, right? And that's the people are the key part. The software involves an agent that runs on all your endpoints, and that reports up to the cloud, right? And we have some software and some scripting and AI there that filters some of that information to keep things scalable for us, because there's a lot of things that the agent may report on that we've already seen, and that stuff is going to get filtered out with our software because it's already been through and by an engineer, and it's a known good thing. And that goes back to what we're saying about the noise, right? We're trying to cut down the noise, only report to you guys what's important, right? So if we go into one of those investigations, let's just say that that's happened. The agent sent back some reports, and an investigation needs to occur, and we'll just go in here and grab an example one. And so this screen is really a good, it shows a good demarcation between what our software is looking at and what our people are looking at, right? So The software is really looking at the stuff at the top, right? We're looking at a classification, we're looking at a persistence mechanism, kind of what it's using to remain in the environment through a reboot, and a binary. And that binary, again, is just a fingerprint of a file, right? It's the same kind of hash that AV uses. We take it further than that, though, right? We're not just looking at the binary. We're actually kind of looking at, the software is looking at all these things and trying to determine, have we seen this before or not? And so once something comes in that's unknown, you'll start seeing comments here. It goes to an investigation. One of our people, in this case, Cameron, who's on our threat ops team, started to take a look at this, right? And so he started this investigation, and it tells us why, right? It was an unclassified auto run, which means it was something we hadn't seen before. It did have a trusted persistence mechanism, so we had seen that, but it was an unclassified binary, right? So what probably changed here is Malwarebytes had an update, right? And so they, as any software, they're going to update, they're going to change a file, that's going to change the binary, and we're going to have to investigate that and try to figure out if it's malicious or not. Because again, what we hunt for is things that, you know, hackers many times will use the things that are already in the OS that are legitimate things to do their work, right? And so that's what we have to really pay attention, right? Everything that changes, we're going to take a look at if we haven't seen it before. So he goes through this investigation and he does all his homework, and he comes out with the response here of, hey, malware, this is a component of Malwarebytes. It is reputable persistence mechanism launching expected and reputable binary, right? So, and it's got a valid digital signature signed by Malwarebytes. So in other words, you know, Cameron looks at this thing and he says, okay, well, this thing is working the way we expect it to work, right? It's within the bounds of what we know Malwarebytes to do. So this is not being used maliciously, it's the real deal. And he's going to close out the investigation, and he's going to set the auto run. He's going to reclassify it as reputable, and the binary also. And so what that does for us is, anytime, you know, the next client we have that we see this updated binary, the software is already going to know, hey, we've already looked at this. We've ran it by a human. They've checked it out, and they're like, hey, this is fine, right? So that way, that's what helps us scale. And so our humans don't have to look at everything. Once we change that, like Jeremy said, we're building our own detection. So we use that information to do that, right? So this was an example of one that came through that was a non-malicious one. We'll take a look at one that was actually an incident and walk through that report. So
and Shane, while you pull that up, just because we see that as reputable doesn't mean that at 15 minutes from now, an attacker used that to underneath that modify the code to use it for their purposes. We would then see that as a changed hash that would be an unknown binary for us to reinvestigate. So just because the hash of the binary would have to match exactly for us to continue seeing that as reputable. If it changes, that kicks off another investigation, because the majority of what we're finding are attackers misusing real things, and they can either modify existing or pretend to be a known trusted element. But it's us digging underneath, asking the question, not is this good or is this bad? That's what your AV does. We are there to determine, why is this here and what is it really doing? Like when I put this in a sandbox and investigate and dissect it, what is it really doing under the hood?
Yep, good points. So once we find something that is malicious, in that process of that threat ops engineer going through and investigating that, they get to a point where they're going to submit a report to you, right? And this report, and you'll get that as in the form of an email, or we can send it into a ticketing system. And at the very top, it's always the same, right? We have these, we're going to give you the classification, whether it's low, high, or critical. We're going to tell you what machine it's on and in what organization it is. And that organization can be, you know, a department. It could be HR, IT, that sort of thing. Those are, you guys define that. And that just helps you identify when this thing happens, you got a better idea of where it's occurring in your network. At the very top, we're going to tell you what it is, right? In this case, it's Covter. And Covter is a fileless malware. It has several anti-removal and self-defense mechanisms. So we're going to give you kind of blurb on what it is and the history of it, right? We're going to give you some advice about, hey, considering the high risk pose, we recommend you wipe the host. sometimes that's the only way to be sure, right? And we know that that's not always feasible. Sometimes you need to get data off there. Sometimes you want to just attempt to clean something to see if you can and not have to wipe. And so we're still going to give you all the remediation steps to do manually down here below that. But we do want to give you, as security personnel, we want to give you advice, right? Again, we're going to give you the host name. We're going to give you the organization. A tag here is an optional thing. It can be defined when you install the agent. And a lot of times we see, companies use like a site. If you're a multi-site organization, maybe you put your site names in there as you're installing these at the different sites. Again, so that you can tell when an event happens, you know about where you need to go look physically, right? And there's, sometimes we'll see workstation server in there. It's just some metadata that you can define. And the security products, as Jeremy said, and mainly we're doing that because we want you, it's a gut check, right? Is everything here that you expected? Maybe malware, whatever malware you're dealing with, actually uninstalled one of your tools. And it's good for you to know that.